Good morning or afternoon or evening, depending on your time zone. Welcome to the Resource Center for Public Sociology event series on racial equity, Indigenous knowledges, and research ethics. Today, we are thrilled to have an opportunity to hear from Professor Ishrat Sultana, who joins us from Dhaka, Bangladesh in the middle of the night, and she will be introduced to you shortly. I'm Ann Kim, a faculty member in sociology and current director of the center. I'd like to begin by recognizing that many Indigenous nations have long-standing relationships with the territories upon which York University campuses are located that precede the establishment of York University, the RCPS, and the Department of Sociology. We acknowledge our presence on the traditional territory of many Indigenous nations. The area known as Tekaronto has been caretaken by the Anishinaabe Nation, the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, and the Huron-Wendat. It is now home to many First Nation, Inuit, and Métis communities. We acknowledge the current treaty holders, the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation. This territory is subject of the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Belt Covenant, an agreement to peaceably share and care for the Great Lakes region. With recent and ongoing events that challenge taken for granted beliefs that we have achieved universal civil rights and racial equity, particularly for Black and Indigenous peoples across Canada, we are focusing this year's events around the interrelated themes of racial equity, Indigenous knowledges, and research ethics. This country's official discourse as a multicultural nation belies the entrenched systemic and institutionalized Eurocentric ideology that persists in education, the justice system, labor markets and the economy, healthcare, research, and that structures our day-to-day lives and interactions. Public sociology has an important role to play in mapping such inequities and in confronting dominant ideas, assumptions, and practices in scholarship and in everyday lives. With this aim, this year's RCPS talks join broader dialogues and calls to action. Please note, today's event is being live streamed on YouTube and recorded and will be linked on Facebook. This means that you and your background may be visible to or be heard by others. For today, Dr. Sultana will speak for about 50 minutes and we will follow it with questions via the chat function in Zoom. So please write out your questions in Zoom and direct all questions to me, Ann Kim. Today's event on Ethnographic Praxis, Reflections on Ethics, Boundaries, and Social Change in Research with Rohingyas is co-sponsored by the York Center for Asian Research, or YCAR, and the Center for Refugee Studies, or CRS. To give you some background on YCAR at York University, it is a research center that hosts a community of faculty, graduate students, and other research associates committed to analyzing the changing historical and contemporary dynamics of societies in Asia, understanding Asia's place in the world, and studying the experiences of Asian communities in Canada and elsewhere. And with that, I'll invite Professor Jennifer Heineman to tell us about the Center for Refugee Studies at York and also to introduce today's speaker.
Hello, everyone. Greetings from Toronto to all of you out there on the wires. It's my pleasure to bring a few greetings from the Center for Refugee Studies in a moment, and also my pleasure to introduce Dr. Ishrat Sultana, who of course is a PhD from York University. I had the pleasure and privilege of meeting Professor Sultana back in 2013. We had the chance to work at the Center for Refugee Studies on a summer course there in 2014, and that was very much a pleasure. So the Center for Refugee Studies, very briefly, is a center that focuses on human displacement, both abroad, in conflict zones, encampments, settlements, cities, wherever exile and refugees, but of course, migrants, people basically forced to make decisions about leaving their homeland may be. So that may be Toronto, that may be any number of places between here and there. Let me focus on Professor Sultana's accomplishments for a moment, if I may. Ishrat Zakia Sultana, PhD, is assistant professor in the Department of Political Science and Sociology and coordinator of the Center for Peace Studies at the South Asian Institute of Policy and Governance at the North-South University in Bangladesh. She is, of course, as I mentioned, graduated with a PhD in sociology from York in 2019. Her research interests include refugees, citizenship, identity, children, policy, and Asia, just a few small topics. Ishrat worked for a decade with the government and was interacting with a number of UN agencies, including FAO, UNDP, Development Program, UNICEF, Bangladesh, offering technical and strategic advice to government and development partners on the empowerment of disadvantaged people, often including coastal fishing communities, street children, at-risk youth who did not have parental care in Bangladesh. She also, worked closely with the Ministry of Social Welfare of Bangladesh in designing and organizing a training on proactive approaches to child-friendly social work for government and NGO personnel. She has published articles and book chapters on the Rohingya refugees and the garment industry workers in Bangladesh. Her recently accomplished research projects include refugee education in South and Southeast Asia and Rohingya education in Bangladesh for those without legal identity. So it's my pleasure to introduce Ishrat with one small housekeeping item to add before I do that. And that is that the coordinator for the Center for Refugee Studies, Michelle Millard, is on the call. And later on in this presentation, but before the Q&A, we'll make the attendance form available to students of the certificate and diploma who are with us today. So without further ado, I welcome, and again, it's a pleasure to have with us Dr. Ishrat Sultana.
Thank you very much, Professor Jennifer Henmond, and thank you, Professor Ann Kim, and everyone involved in the organization of this event. Thank you very, very much. I'm so honored to be here with you, although I was not able to come back to York physically because of this pandemic, but it's such a great moment for me to be here with you online. Okay, so let me begin then. I'd like to begin with Weber and Baker to set the tone of my talk. So taking sides in research has always been a matter of debates and discussions in sociological research. Both Weber and Baker gave suggestions on this, and as a student of sociology, I find their suggestions quite helpful, interesting, impressive, yet difficult to apply to fieldwork in the fullest sense. To do ethnographic research in a refugee camp, what a researcher needs is time, patience, attention, a notebook, a pen, and awareness of the position of the self. The last one, the awareness of the position of the self, tells why it is difficult to apply both or any of the suggestions when you are in the field. This self-awareness is involved with the concept of hierarchy. Some may not agree with me, but I would argue that when you remind yourself of your position as a researcher, you subconsciously also remind yourself that hierarchically you are above a group of stateless people from social standing. So distance comes in. Distance between the researcher and the researched is unavoidable here, which often becomes a barrier to fair and neutral way of data collection. But self-awareness is essential for a researcher to remember whose side the researcher is on. In my view, it is actually the researcher who decides the ways of and determines the degrees to maintain value neutrality and relevance, as well as taking a particular side. Because the purpose of an ethnographic research with refugees is not merely to measure whether and how much relevance and neutrality of values have been applied to the fieldwork, rather to make sure that scientific methods have been applied to the research, and to trust the understanding of the self to explore how these vulnerable people make sense of their statelessness, vulnerabilities, and their social world. In my research, while I was sympathetic towards my participants, I tried to balance my subjectivity and objectivity, which was not really an easy task, I'd say. So there is a quote I'd like to share with you, as you can see on the screen. Ethnography appeals to our instinct to trust not others' rules and realities, but to trust the force of our own understanding and do the hard thinking required in the art of inquiry. It is the most basic form of social research and resembles the way in which people ordinarily make sense of their world. I find this quote quite interesting for my research. Uh, Researchers should make sure that whatever point of view we take, our research meets the standards of good scientific work, that our unavoidable sympathies do not render our results invalid, as said by Baker. Therefore, being a producer and a consumer of research, I tried to apply a humanistic understanding to observe their social world, which is reflected in this quote on the screen. In this talk, first, I'm going to give a quick overview of my research and research participants and gaining access to the camps. Then I'll talk about setting boundaries in doing ethnography with refugees and maintaining ethics. Then my experience and learning, and finally, a few words about my involvement in doing public sociology. So let me start with overview of my research and research participants. But before that, I'd like to show this map to you just to give you an idea about the location of Bangladesh and Myanmar. One is the refugee hosting country and the other is refugee producing country. So this is just to give you a quick idea. So I accomplished my study through ethnographic fieldwork in 2016, which began in 2014. And I used semi-structured interviews, focus group discussions, and participant observation. I'd like to show this quote from Olcott because this trilogy of these 3 E's complemented my work: experiencing, inquiring, and examining. My use of participant observation, conducting interviews, and examining what has been produced by other researchers have been guided by these 3 E's. And a few photographs taken by me during my fieldwork. I think this is one of the earliest photograph that I took after entering the field. So this is the camp. It was taken in 2016, the Unregistered camp for the Rohingyas. And this is also the inside view of the Unregistered Rohingya camp at Kutupalong, which is located in Ukhia Upazila. Upazila is the sub-district in English. And one more picture, which is very recent. It was not taken by me though. It was during this COVID situation. Okay. So 48 Rohingya participated in my research directly. They took part in individual interviews and focus group discussions in my research. Apart from these 48 participants, for direct in-depth discussions, many were involved with my study indirectly. And I always feel grateful to them for their generous support, either by providing information about the camp situation or introducing fellow camp residents with me. I did not need an interpreter as I was able to communicate with my participants directly, and I transcribed my data by myself. So this table, I think it's too tiny, but let me make it, yeah. So this table shows the profile of my research participants according to their age, gender, location, and status of participation in individual interviews and focus group discussions. So in total, as I said, I had 48 Rohingya people who participated in my study. A few words about site selection. So I conducted my research in both registered and unregistered refugee camps at 2 upazilas, which is in English sub-districts in Cox's Bazar district in Bangladesh. There were Kutupalong registered and unregistered camps at Ukia Upazila, and Noyapara registered and Leda unregistered camps at Teknaf Upazila. I'll talk about more about this registered and unregistered in a moment. So all 4 camps, 2 registered and 2 unregistered camps, were selected based on the availability of Rohingya refugees in these locations. Just to add that this division of camp has been changed since 2017. But these were the only places in Bangladesh where Rohingya refugees were officially allowed to live temporarily. From the political and administrative points of view, due to the porous border in this region, the names of both upazilas are associated with human trafficking, smuggling, drugs, and crimes. Border forces often stop vehicles and check passengers as part of their routine duty to control suspicious movements. Okay, so a few words about registered and unregistered Rohingya people. Immediately after the influx of Rohingyas to Bangladesh in 1991, the government provided them shelter and relief. Soon, the government realized that Rohingya would need long-term support. Due to the lack of policy in place, the government then recorded Rohingyas' names along with family information, included them in the government database, and provided them with shelter and other services. The registered camps are government operated. Since then, the Rohingyas have been known as registered refugees. At the same time, a series of forced repatriation took place during 1992 and 1994 that pushed a large number of Rohingyas to Burma. By the way, I'm using the term Burma because when I spoke to my research participants, they never used the term Myanmar. They prefer to use Burma. So just to respect that, I also use the term Burma instead of Myanmar. But because of insurmountable violence against Rohingya in Burma, most of the repatriated ones came back to Bangladesh soon. And these Rohingya have remained as unregistered until 2017, as they have never been officially acknowledged by the government. They formed their own camps adjacent to the government-operated registered camp in both Ukia and Teknaf, Upazila. The registered camps received support from the government, the UNHCR, and other national and international agencies, except for a few interventions by some NGOs regarding health and sanitation. The unregistered camps received nothing and yet managed to survive. So this was the situation until before 2017. At present, Bangladesh accommodates over 1 million FDMNs and between 30,000 and 35,000 registered Rohingya in Cox's Bazar district. The term unregistered is not in use now. Rather, since 2017, the government has been using a term FDMN for those who are not registered refugees. You are not supposed to be familiar with this term because this term doesn't exist in the refugee vocabulary that we are familiar with. FDMN stands for Forcibly Displaced Myanmar Nationals. So technically, these 1 million people are not refugees in Bangladesh. Okay, so my experiences and learning. Prior to my fieldwork, putting efforts to collect enough information about the field from relevant government offices, non-government organizations, my personal networks, and online were quite helpful. Secondly, I didn't confine myself to specific plans and strategies for my fieldwork. For example, my initial plan was to observe and know my participants and not to conduct any interviews and FGDs in the first few days until I was able to know most of them. But after the first few hours of my introductory meeting with a group of Rohingya women in the unregistered camp, I felt that it was a suitable time to conduct an FGD with some of the women I met. This way, I came out of my initial plan. I had to allocate sufficient time, though, in the next couple of weeks for rapport building with other participants in the camp. My consistent observation of and participation in their everyday activities, particularly in their domestic activities, facilitated the rapport building process effectively. My ethnography training at York University made me aware that everything in the field does not follow the plan of an ethnographer. Ethnographers have to be ready to change the strategies developed earlier, develop new strategies according to the demand of the situation, and sometimes to imagine the situation beforehand to deal with any unexpected scenario or question. My experiential knowledge about the Rohingya community's conventional and simplistic attitude informed me of their possible curiosity towards my personal life. Unlike Western people, they would most likely ask about my earnings, my family status, and some other personal questions too. Before entering the field, I prepared myself for these kind of questions based on anticipated conversations between my participants and I. In this regard, this quote on the screen is quite pertinent to my fieldwork, as Olcott rightly points out that the purposes that guide ethnography inquiry do not spring forth from the settings in which ethnography is conducted. They are something that ethnographers bring with them to the scene. And this quote echoes Marcus's idea of being an imaginative ethnographer. Being an imaginative ethnographer not only helped me to respond to their questions about myself, but also made it easier for me to build rapport with them smoothly eventually. The beginning, or my entrance to the field for the first time in 2014. Access to Rohingya refugee camps in Bangladesh requires government permission. So I had to follow the procedure of the government accordingly. In order to gain my access, I wanted to discuss my research with the Rohingya Refugee Repatriation Commissioner, RRRC. In Bangladesh, they call it RRRC. In Cox's Bazar, Bangladesh in summer 2014. And I flew from Canada to Bangladesh for that. However, I ended up meeting with a representative of RRRC in Cox's Bazar in August 2014. As the RRRC, the RRRC was called by his high officials for another task. I discussed my research proposal with the representative of the RRRC. And I was lucky that despite bureaucratic complexities in the government system, I received the required permission letter by early September 2014, just before I left for Canada to continue my fall courses at York. I wanted to play this video. Let me just give it a try. If it doesn't, I will just say a few words about it. I stopped the video. I think I could rather say a few words about the video. So this video was made when I was coming back from Kutupalong refugee camp in 2016, and I was coming to Cox's Bazar, and this is just to show you the place, the location, and it was by this public transport, and you can see the road was not really wide, but in this road there are checkposts after a while when the border security people stops the vehicle and they ask questions as part of their duty. Okay, so going back to my research then. Okay. I think I will go back to this one. All right, so I employed a reflexive approach of participant observation along with FGDs and semi-structured individual interviews. Initially, I thought that my personal network with a few local non-government employees involved in providing services to the Rohingya refugees would be helpful to recruit my participants in the research. But the reality was different for me. Because of living outside Bangladesh for quite a few years, I had lost many of the contacts I had in the past when working in the development sector in Bangladesh. As a result, during my 2014 visit, I found only one NGO staff working in that area who was known to me. And that individual expressed interest to introduce me to my participants. However, that individual was transferred to a different location when I began my fieldwork in 2016. My positionality. Regarding my positionality during my fieldwork, I noticed that my outward appearance labeled me as one of them, while my partially different form of dialect identified me as other, making me neither purely an insider nor fully an outsider. However, my partial familiarity with Rohingyas' cultural practices was helpful to understand their cultural references, the concepts they use, and the expressions they make that generated an intimacy with them. Yet, before I began my fieldwork, it was difficult for me to anticipate their preference to my insiderness or outsiderness or in-betweenness, and in what ways my reflexivity would harmonize with that position. What I followed in my fieldwork was to be really there and be really aware of the phenomena that took place in the field to produce knowledge. So, the beginning of 2016, my fieldwork in 2016. Entering the camp in early January 2016 created a mixed feeling within me, fairly ambivalent, an excitement of beginning my research for which I had been waiting since the onset of my journey with sociology in 2013. I was nervous to some extent, and I was concerned over maintaining research ethics and following research methods. And indeed, I had curiosity of meeting a new people who have come from a state, yet stateless, and live in this place in Bangladesh, yet placeless. In my professional life, I worked with vulnerable people such as coastal fishing communities, socially disadvantaged women, street children, and children without parental care in Bangladesh. All of this gave me ideas of what vulnerability and helplessness denote. But this was the first time I was there to talk and spend several months with the Rohingya people. I was unsure how to start up. I was advancing with a feeling of strangeness, thinking of how to begin a conversation and how to recruit my participants. Although I knew about this place was new to me. And although I didn't ask anyone for directions, I was questioning and constructing thoughts, seeking a direction within myself. Finding no prescribed formula, I began recruiting my research participants using an informal strategy. In particular, judgmental sampling, relying on my own judgment to find the most appropriate members in a simplistic and natural way by initiating an informal conversation with them. My initial conversations with them helped me to find my research participants considering their gender, age, diverse experiences, etc. I took quite a few pictures in the unregistered camps, and a few of them I just shared with you. However, because of the strict restrictions of the camp management regarding outside people's movement inside the camp, I was able to take only a few pictures in the registered camp. My study ended up with almost no policy materials reviewed as the RRC office and the CIC, which is camp in charge, in one camp declined to share any government documents with me. Another CIC, who was fairly enthusiastic and supportive towards my research, gave me a government fact sheet on the services government provides in the camp. Within Rohingya community, particularly when it comes to having informal conversation, initially they prefer to have it within same gender, women with women, men with men. Hence, I was in a privileged position to build rapport with Rohingya women first, who later introduced me to the male members in their families. Because of the nature of my site, I noticed that my FGT participants felt more comfortable in sharing personal experiences to me, as it created a common platform for them to share their stories of complex nature without feeling any risk or pressure. I cannot guarantee whether I missed any subtle expressions or sarcasm or slang during my conversation with them, but I did try to be really there and be really aware. So, setting boundaries in doing ethnography with refugees and ethics. Being a Bangladeshi by birth, my skills in the native language and familiarity with cultural practices allowed me to understand cultural references and concepts as well as nuances of speech expressions, which are taken for granted. In addition, my familiarity with the norms and practices of Cox's Bazar made me alert of not roaming alone after the sunset. For example, a woman roaming the streets without accompanying a male person at night is not easily acceptable sight in an area like Kutupalong or Noyapara, where the camps are located. Knowing this kind of information before coming to the field was really helpful to me, because I was able to plan accordingly and avoid acts such as heedlessness and whimsicalness that do not fit the research context. I, in fact, paid more attention to complete my fieldwork without creating any troubles and without letting others create any trouble in my work. And I think I became more aware on this after reading Alice Goffman's On the Run. So just to be on track, I had to alert myself. For an ethnographer, avoiding some degree of deception, finding balance between subjectivity and objectivity, as well as between being an insider or outsider, and achieving an acceptable level of credibility always remain a challenge. Many of the ethnographic studies confirm that debates concerning methodological issues in fieldwork are part of ethnography. In order to navigate this situation, I would like to share my ways to set boundaries during my fieldwork with the refugees. So these are the points that I wanted to share with you, uh, which indicate that how I consider setting boundaries between subjectivity and objectivity, and between being an insider and outsider. So I tried to understand them instead of making them understand me. I kept an eye on the surrounding environment to be really there and to be really aware, to get a signal of what to ask and what to avoid. And I tried to have trust on the participants, but not to be blind. I tried to comply the norms and practices of the camps. And the last one, I wanted to be invisibly visible, because I didn't want to draw unnecessary attention of my research participants or the refugee community as a whole by distracting them. I mean, I wanted to follow the norms and practices in the camp, and also I avoided using luxurious bags or shoes or even phones, so that I can try to be with them, and they feel comfortable to talk to me. They don't feel much distance with me. Since one's self and one's methods are implicated in the knowledge one produces, the strategies I used, such as participant observation and overtness, gave me confidence in my results, and that I believe participants were candid about their identity, belongingness, the type of persecution they experienced, etc. And perhaps were less candid about other aspects, how they obtain a Bangladeshi identity card, or how much they receive from their relatives living in Malaysia or Saudi Arabia. This way, I was able to maintain ethical principles of not forcing them to share the information that they didn't want to share with me, and avoid deceiving them and crossing the boundary of ethical code of conduct. Because of the nature of my research context, I had to balance between subjectivity and objectivity, harmonize between my positions as an insider and outsider, and know my participants' dilemma, fear, hope with their identity amid their statelessness. Although I adequately emphasized openness uh, and rapport building, I noticed that a few participants were reluctant to give accurate information about their age, family members living abroad, steps they followed to obtain a Bangladeshi identity card, remittances they received from relatives staying abroad, or hiding their identity as a registered Rohingya while accessing health services at the hospital established for the unregistered Rohingya. So, from this experience, I learned that accurate representation of human behavior would perhaps always involve some limitations, despite the openness of the researcher. I didn't aim to investigate the truth, but I did aim to represent the truth I found in my field. So, some words about the recent situation. Many a time, the humbleness of refugees is interpreted as cowardliness, and they are often portrayed first refugees, then human beings. And this is not exception for the Rohingya as well. After the major exodus in 2016 and 2017, we heard about dialogues, meetings, initiatives for repatriation of the Rohingya. But as time went by, we found the uselessness of these initiatives. Rarely any consultation was made with the Rohingya, and assessment was conducted to know whether the environment in Burma was suitable for them to return. We know that a refugee is someone who refused to be oppressed. But for the Rohingya, it seems like it is a never-ending operation, just the dimension is different. Let me give you a few examples to show how Rohingya agency does not work in some situations like this, and how various techniques applied by the host country turn the situation worse, no less than oppression. In August 25, 2019, the Rohingya marked the second year of their exodus to Bangladesh. That day, a large number of Rohingya gathered and demanded their rights in Burma by rallying and praying. But this event created anxiety and fear among the government. Some government officials at the Triple RC office in Cox's Bazar were transferred for their failure to prevent Rohingya from being united. And in August 2020, that means this year, no mass gathering, no rally, no mass prayers were allowed. Another example, a series of recent fire guards at Rohingya camp gives birth to questions regarding the safety and protection of these people. From January 2018 to May 2020, reportedly 6 fire guards have taken place in the camps and in the nearby markets of small shops, most of which are owned by the Rohingya people. The most recent one occurred in the early morning of May 12 this year, damaged over 600 shanties in the camp. Luckily, no one died except a few were injured. But Rohingya who used to rely on those small shops for making a living were badly affected. It was reported that gas cylinder used for cooking caused the fire. Now the questions are, over a span of 2 years, what cautionary steps have been taken to prevent further fire guards? What support has been provided to those who lost their sources of income? Why there was no adequate support for the victims whose living places were turned into ashes, forcing them to spend their days and nights under the open sky until they moved to a new place within the camp by themselves? One more example. Internet in the Rohingya camps was restored in August 2020 after a year of shutdown by the government. Since September 2019, immediately after the mass gathering of their 2 years celebration, there was no internet in the camps due to security measure. Such banning, which badly affected the entire communication system within the camp in the critical situation of COVID-19, reflects the extent exclusionary humanitarian approach. Okay, so I guess I'm almost at the end, but now I'm gonna talk about public sociology. As part of doing public sociology, I have been writing media articles, and I'm thankful to Professor Ann H. Kim for posting some of the links on York website, on YCAR website. So my articles, staying within sociological boundaries, critically analyze the contemporary social issues, particularly Rohingya crisis. My aim is to contribute to positive social changes through involving a large group of non-academic audiences. Rohingya issue is the latest example of genocide and ethnic cleansing. It is also a vivid example of how geopolitics of the neighbor countries of Burma play a central role in making economic progress for the countries, ignoring the human rights of a group of stateless people. If you recall the map that I showed you at the beginning, the geographical location of Burma is so convenient for Burma that it draws support from China, India, and other countries like Japan, Korea, and they all work together for their economic progress, ignoring human rights. Okay. So, what roles the global conventions, treaties, and compacts play then? My articles, as part of doing public sociology, attempt to critically examine the role of these international conventions and national initiatives to resolve the crisis. Let me share an example of the failure of such conventions and compacts to ensure protection, safety, and human rights of refugees like Rohingya. The Global Compact on Refugees, which is known as GCR, affirmed by the UN 2 years ago, has 4 key objectives: ease the pressures on host countries, enhance refugee self-reliance, expand access to third country solutions, and support conditions in countries of origin for a return in safety and dignity. The most effective way to ease the pressures on host countries is perhaps sending more money, more donations, which is reflected in the recent decisions made by the UK, USA, and the European Union on October 22nd this year. These countries, in an online international conference hosted by UNHCR, decided to donate $600 million to continue refugee programs in Bangladesh for 10 years. Why this 10-year project? To ease the pressure on the host country, or to ease the integration of the Rohingya in the host country gradually? The second objective is absolutely an impossible idea in the context of a host country like Bangladesh. The country firmly believes that Rohingya must go back to their homeland. Hence, any measure towards their self-reliance will go against the political belief of Bangladesh. Clearly, Bangladesh has reaffirmed it by not taking self-reliance initiatives for the Rohingya in last 4 decades of hosting these people. The third objective, resettlement. This third objective also didn't work for the last 4 decades, except a small number of token resettlement, which took place between 2006 and 2010. In this time, Canada took 303 Rohingya from Bangladesh. We need to remember the number of Rohingya population in Bangladesh. It's 1 million, not just few hundred. So which country will actually come forward to resettle this 1 million Rohingya? That's a big question. Now, the fourth objective, supporting conditions in countries of origin for return in safety and dignity. Who will do that? UNHCR? Until now, no visible efforts have been observed regarding having meetings, dialogues, or conversations between Burmese government and UNHCR to improve the situation within Burma. We just don't know anything about the situation in Burma. So none of these 4 objectives of GCR helps to find a solution to the Rohingya crisis. And that's why I agree with what Jennifer Heinemann writes in her upcoming article, that inviting the World Bank to lend to already indebted states in order to make refugees more self-reliant and therefore less costly is insulting and merely a grand band-aid that does nothing to change the current paradigm. To conclude, whether we agree or disagree, repatriation of the Rohingya is still a far-fetched dream. The UN's International Court of Justice in January ordered Burma to take all measures within its power to prevent any acts of genocide against ethnic Rohingya Muslims who fled the country amid a bloody military crackdown in 2017. The ICJ ordered Burma to submit a report within 4 months on what actions it is taking to comply with the court's decision, and to submit follow-up reports every 6 months after that. The court accepted the first of the required reports in May 2020, but its contents have not been released. So people who are engaged in doing public sociology on Rohingya issue may not be able to resolve the Rohingya crisis, but surely can continue performing their responsibilities to remind themselves whose side the sociologists are on. To me, this is important for human beings. Thank you very much for your patience here.
Thank you, Ishrat, for that very informative talk, and that, you know, will, I think, encourage all of us to think more globally and in terms of sort of the relationships that we have with our participants and our own positions in our own studies. And thank you for doing this work and for linking it to public sociology as well. We can now open it up to questions, just to keep things sort of in order, and because I can't see everyone's screens. If you could type out your questions in the Zoom chat box, I will read out your name and the question to Ishrat. You can direct it to me so that I can sort of keep order of the questions. Yeah, so we have some time left to do that. Do we have any questions? Okay, as we wait, sometimes it takes time to think of a question and then also to write it out. I'll ask a question. What are your ongoing relationships with the participants in the camps? Are you still in touch with them? What was your relationship with them after, you know, the research itself ended?
Well, I'm in touch with some of my participants until now. Because at North-South University, my research also focuses on Rohingya, particularly Rohingya education. So for that reason, I visit the camps, I meet the Rohingya people, particularly my participants, and I try to get the news of all the participants that I met in 2016. But unfortunately, I lost some of them because, as I said, that after 2017, the unregistered camp was restructured now that they are called forcibly displaced Myanmar nationals. So I have connection with a few of them, but I don't really know the whereabouts of others.
So the forcibly displaced Myanmar nationals, were they were moved to a different place?
Well, after the arrival of this huge number of Rohingya in 2016 and 2017, the government employed military to make their accommodation, to restructure the camp. And the earlier unregistered ones who came in 1991 and 1992, they were given the same space to live with the Fdmp. So they live in the same space now.
Okay, we have a question in the chat by Deba Mitra Barua. What is the difference between registered and unregistered, or Fdmp, in terms of their entitlement or lack of it in receiving aids and assistance?
Thank you for your question. The registered ones till now receive all kinds of support from the government, from UNHCR, and from other national and international agencies. And this support includes from food ration to mosquito net, everything, okay? But, and also they have this ID, the refugee ID card, which is issued by the government of Bangladesh and UNHCR, which protects them when they are on the way to Cox's Bazar. If they are asked about their identity, they can show this card. But for the unregistered one, I'm talking about the unregistered ones until before 2017. So these unregistered ones did not have this ID card, and they were out of the service provisions. They did not receive any support, no food support, no education, nothing from the government and from any other agencies. Now come to the FDMNs, forcibly displaced Myanmar nationals. So these people receive basic supports that includes food, basic medicine, like health support, basic education, and also accommodation as well. But it's been a question what kind of education they receive and how much the health service is sufficient. These are all big questions. But still, the situation, I would say, is slightly better than the situation of the unregistered ones until before 2017. I hope it answers your question.
Okay, thank you. From Professor Heinmond, thank you, Ishrat. What is public opinion in Bangladesh around the Rohingya issue at this point in time? Is there donor or hosting fatigue? We hear about boatloads of women traveling to Malaysia to accept marriage proposals, some landing in SA. What conditions? And then I think it cut off her question. Or what conditions would precipitate these dangerous journeys?
Okay. So the public opinion in general is mixed, Jennifer. Like we are kind, like people in Bangladesh are kind to them, but people are aware that how much land they have occupied and how much negative consequences for the entire environment it's going to bring in the near future. And particularly in Cox's Bazar district, if I more specifically talk about Ukhia and Teknaf, where the camps are located, it was found that when there is a natural disaster like rain or landslide or something like that, the local people extend support to the Rohingya people. But if you ask them whether they would like to let the Rohingya people integrate to Bangladesh, they would say no. Several research confirmed this, that they are kind enough, but then they still believe that these Rohingya people should go back to their own country. Regarding this dangerous journey, risky journey to Malaysia, it's what I hear from my research participants that it's still ongoing very secretly, but in fewer number. Perhaps because of the COVID-19 situation, but it's still going on.
Okay, thank you. From Alim Laila, a question for Dr. Sultana. What are your thoughts on the issuance of Rohingya National Verification Cards, or Nbcs? Do you see this as a positive step towards safe repatriation of the Rohingya back to Myanmar, or is this a temporary Band-Aid solution?
Well, it can be both, depending upon how the dialogues, negotiations, discussions between the host country and refugee producing country goes on. Because this card would definitely be helpful when they are repatriated with safety and dignity. But what value would this card have if the repatriation doesn't take place? But I would say that most important thing is to include the Rohingya people in the discussion, in the consultation, in terms of the repatriation. But the card is okay if the repatriation takes place.
Okay, thank you. I don't have any further questions in my chat. So I think we can end it here. Thank you, Dr. Sultana, for joining us. And you probably want to go to bed sometime soon. Thank you all.
It's
Thank you
it's
for turning on your
about the
devices.
Rohingya. Yeah, it's about the Rohingya, and for York, so it's fine to stay awake at night. It's fine.
So just a final word of thanks, a vote of thanks for Professor Sultana. Very insightful, and we wish you well on your continued and future endeavors around these and related issues. So thank you for your work.